Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our digital transformation panel, where you will have the opportunity to hear directly from this diverse panel of leaders. We will then be able to learn their perspectives on the integral role of digital transformation in the future. Without further ado, I have the pleasure of introducing today's panel moderator, Noreen Cohen-White. Noreen is a global technology managing director at Deloitte. As a global technology executive, Noreen leads technology teams around the world in the Americas, Europe, and Asia Pacific regions, providing strategy and technology expertise to clients to align business and technology strategies and drive business value through technology innovation. Noreen, it is a pleasure to have you moderating today's session. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Gina, and good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to be here, and I am joined today by some very esteemed panelists. And I will turn it over to them to introduce themselves in just a moment. I wanted to first just talk about what we're seeing today with respect to the digital transformation trends. There's a lot happening in this space, and we're in for a very exciting discussion. My goal today is to stimulate a lively conversation, engaging you as well as our panelists in conversation. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Jeff first to introduce himself.
Hello, thank you very much. My name is Jeff Stovall. I'm currently a director of business development and strategy with Oracle Corporation. I've been in IT for over 25 years, and my role prior to coming to Oracle was as CIO for the city of Charlotte for 10 years.
Thank you, Jeff. Zelna.
Good day, everyone. My name is Zelna Hariskar. I am a business architect focused on the cloud strategy over at Microsoft. And I've actually been a part of the IT industry now for a little over 20 years. As part of my role, I'm focused on looking at all of the business levers of an organization and making certain that we are driving our business acceleration towards at least $1 billion plus across all of our portfolio of products and solutions. Thank you for having me today. I look forward to the discussion, and I look forward to sharing with the community.
Thank you, Zelna. Jerome.
Hey, good afternoon. My name is Jerome Oglesby. I serve as the Global Chief Technology Officer for Deloitte. I have the pleasure of working with Noreen on a daily basis. But I lead a lot of our digital transformation when it comes to things that we're doing for Deloitte itself, as well as many of our efforts around our infrastructure environment, our enterprise operations, and what we're doing from a platform services perspective.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Jerome. And all of you are very, very experienced in this topic, and I'm so excited to be able to facilitate this conversation today. Recent studies have shown that 77% of CEOs report that the pandemic has accelerated their digital transformation plans. 99% of businesses agree that these digital technologies are going to open up in the future and continue to shape the way that we work and the changes in the way that we work. You know, majority of the companies are seeking new ways of engaging their customers, and many companies are transforming digital communications, and it's extremely critical to addressing their business challenges. So while today's trends pertaining to digital transformation, increased remote work, and expansion of contingent workforce are already being experienced, this global pandemic has really accelerated the pace of change. And many companies that have had 3 to 5 year roadmaps have seen many pieces of those strategies having to collapse and accelerate and be delivered within months, and in some cases, weeks, which was our case here at Deloitte. The future of work is here, and our ability to operate with agility and digital dexterity will serve our greatest as our greatest competitive advantage. So, panelists, thank you so much for those introductions, and let's jump right into today's conversation. So for each of you, want to ask the question, what does the digital transformation mean to you, and what would you say are the key ingredients for success?
Well, I'll start. One of the things that you talked about is the future of work. And that reminds me of a quote from William Gibson, an author and futurist, who once said that the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. And I think we've all experienced that over the past year. The fact that we've had these technologies that we're using today to be able to communicate and operate in the pandemic. These are not new technologies. These are technologies in many cases that we've been using for over a decade. And so when we really think about what is the change that has happened, it's not about the change of the technology in and of itself. We're using things that have already been developed in a lot of ways, sometimes a little bit more refined. What we really see in digital transformation is a change of culture. It's a change of how do we think about what work is, how do we execute work, and what are the tools that are at the center of that work versus maybe on the periphery. And so as we've seen particularly, and I work a lot with the public sector, as we've seen a lot more adoption of remote work and of touchless transaction processes, what we're really seeing is now that we have management in organizations that have to reconsider, how do we get work done? How do we interact with our employees? How do we interact with our customers in a way that's in some ways been forced, but has been, foreshadowed for a very long time. So I think part of the fundamental question that we're dealing with when we start talking about digital transformation is how do we change the way that we think, not just what we do? How do we move away from just paving over cow paths with technology and really moving technology to the center of our processes that we're operating in every day? And how do we think about the way that technology is used, not in the way of, does technology add value to a business process? Because now technology is at the center of the business process. Now we're thinking about, how do people add value to the business process when we've already thought about how to automate a lot of these business processes at the core? Our role, the way that we think about using our human capital has changed. And ways that we think about managing our human capital has changed significantly, particularly over the past couple of years.
Thanks, Jeff. I agree completely. And we've seen that as well. And in addition to that, when you talk about our people, there's behaviors and skills too, new behaviors and skills that our people will need to be effective in this new world. So thank you for that. Zelna, your thoughts on the key ingredients for success, and what does digital transformation mean to you?
So I really enjoyed Jeff's commentary on digital transformation, and I agree in many regards and many aspects. What I've come to realize and what I've come to find digital transformation to mean for me is disruption. So if we think about every major industry, we think of every major sector across the globe, every major company, as a part of COVID, but also prior to COVID, there's a lot of transformation that's been occurring from a technology perspective. If you think about just like 10 years ago, us thinking about having to use a card that you could enter into an ATM machine that would then dispense cash, or that you could deposit a check in, was unheard of, right? But we spent a lot of time working through some of the challenges on the back end to make certain that folks understood privacy concerns and understood security challenges, and were more comfortable with using a card, but also using automated features to bank and to spend and utilize their capital. I say all of that to say that when we kind of look at what's happened across the banking industry, I view that as a lot of the disruption that's starting to happen across other major industries and other major areas. I mean, if you look at companies like Kodak, I mean, who remembers Kodak, right? Or who remembers Blockbuster? These were all companies that at one day and age, they were $1 billion plus organizations, but because of digital transformation or because of transformation in that sector, they're no longer around. I say all of that to say that when I think of digital transformation, I think of the pace of change and the pace of acceleration that's happening across every major industry from a technology perspective. So if you look at the hotel industry, I mean, hotel industry has had to shift the way they market, the way they identify, work with customers from a sales as well as a revenue capacity due to companies like Airbnb that are forming. You think about the taxi industry, right? That's a major case study for most MBAs anywhere. I mean, you think about what's happened with the taxi industry from Uber and Lyft and various companies that have joined the rideshare market. I think there's a lot of transformation that's occurring, and it's really occurring across every major industry. And if we take a look across every major industry, there's a technology component that's truly disrupting the market or disrupting that industry. So when I think about digital transformation, that's what I think about. I think about the rate of change and the rate and the pace of change that's happening. And when I think of the mindset or the behavior that we need to have to really adapt to this, I really think of it as growth mindset as well as remaining curious. One of the individuals that I really followed for a long time to really understand disruption and digital transformation was a guy by the name of Clayton Christensen. He's a Harvard professor. He recently transitioned, so may he rest in peace. But he was one of the individuals that initially brought this notation to the market and kind of really shared how the steel mill had transformed over the years and how we started using electricity, but how electricity would start to deplete and we would start to use solar and other sources of energy. And he just has lots of books and lots of commentary on how everything will constantly start to shift around us. But part of being ready from a digital transformation perspective is also making certain that we're keeping up with the change.
Absolutely, Zolna. I think that disruption, as you've pointed out, leads to innovation that really drives a lot of transformation across our businesses. Jerome, what does the digital transformation mean for you, and what would you say are the key ingredients for success?
Well, I agree with both Jeff and Zelma. I mean, it is about disruption. And Zelma made a great point. If you look at banking, I mean, who has written a check to anyone in the last year or so? It's all about, do you have Cash App, Zello, Venmo? Do you have something to send me some digital currency? Because checks just don't happen anymore. That is major disruption. But I think about disruption in really four domains. One is process transformation, and that's transforming the way we actually do things in our business and the way we work in our environments. There's business transformation, and that is more of, how do we start to move into new pieces of the business, or as you say, Noreen, innovate our business. And that's what I see happening in the banking space quite a bit. The other is domain transformation, and that is one Deloitte itself is going through in that domain transformation. And I'll talk about that in a second. But the fourth is really that cultural transformation that we have to go through that Jeff talked about in terms of being successful. You really got to figure out how you transform not only the technology, but the people and those processes and things that come along with it. Now, I talk about the domain transformation. If you look at Deloitte, one of the things that we're doing, we have traditionally been an organization that is all about people. That is what we sell. That is what we make money on. And our transaction process is very simple. We sell you so many people for so many hours, and we charge you a certain rate. That's the business model. That transformation is now moving into that digital transformation, which is saying, hey, that intellectual property that those people that we were selling you have, we want to make money off of that intellectual property. So now we're going to digitize that and make that a product or a service that we'll sell outside of the people that we're actually putting on your site to do work with. That is a huge shift. And that brings a lot of things along with it when you think about what it takes to actually do that. It actually takes transforming the technology, the people, and the processes in order to make all those business models work together. And that to me is what digital transformation is all about.
Absolutely, couldn't agree with you more. Lots of shift there and transformation of people, certainly important part of that. You know, part of the digital transformation, and Jerome, you sort of alluded to this, you know, the shift in organizational culture. Jeff, what would you say, you know, is some of the inertia that needs to be overcome to make that shift?
Well, the biggest inertia that I see, particularly amongst the leadership of organizations, has to do with unlearning what you've learned. I'm a big Star Wars fan, so some of you might remember that segment with Yoda, and he's talking to Luke, and you have to unlearn. You have to unlearn what you've learned. And so the issue here is that many of the leaders that we have in place today grew up and thrived and succeeded in a different time, in a different context. And so as they've ascended to positions of leadership and higher management, you know, what works for you in the past is generally what you stick with, right? But when we find ourselves in a disrupted environment, we have to take account of the things that we think work, but may no longer work in the ways that they used to. And so when it comes to culture and leadership culture, what I see, particularly working with the public sector, is a lot of our leaders got to where they are because they had great instincts, gut feel. They were able to make a lot of great calls about how to proceed, but not necessarily in a data-rich environment. Oftentimes these were relatively data poor environments, or if there was data, it wasn't always reliable data. We now live in an extremely data rich environment. Matter of fact, we have more data than we know what to do with, although Oracle loves to help customers with that problem. And so when we find ourselves in these environments where there's so much data that you have a hard time trying to ingest it, I think it changes the skill set. It changes the skill set from just having great experiences to now also being able to process how is this data relevant to our operations? How is it relevant for our past as well as our future? And how do I take that data and use it to make the right decisions, but also in the context of the people that are in the environment? So I think it actually places a much greater emphasis on EQ, on emotional quotients of how intelligence is measured, because now you have to be a lot more aware of how the people in your organization are operating in a disrupted environment. You have to be able to guide them through that, but you also have to be able to guide them through that with facts, with data, with substantiation. And it's not just all about gut feel and experience. All those things don't go away completely. But now you also have to have these skills in managing people, particularly in environments that are dispersed, remote, maybe even not in a relationship that's a permanent relationship, a lot more temporary type of work. So it just places a different emphasis because it's not everybody at the office anymore. It's not everybody just in one place. You're not having the all hands meeting where thousands of people get together in one big room. If you're having the all hands meeting, it's on Zoom. And those thousands of people are distributed. That's a different EQ capability. So what I think is really important in this digital transformation, in the skill sets that are needed, is this ability to understand, manipulate, and ingest data appropriately, as well as being able to understand how all that data is really impacting the people of your organization and bringing that together in a way that allows everybody to be more effective than just relying on your gut feel and your experience alone.
Thanks, Jeff. Well said. There is certainly tremendous opportunity now for upskilling, and even at Deloitte, we are looking at this and in ways our people can be effective in just having meetings virtually, right? Your virtual presence, how you show up, right, in front of your clients on video, digital facilitation skills, and virtual networking, right? All of these things are new skills that will need to be learned in order to remain competitive. So, what would you say are some of the top skills that are necessary to remain competitive in this new digital era?
So in this new digital era, I mean, you've touched on a few things, Noreen. So one of the challenges is that we're somewhat isolated. So we definitely have to figure out in this new era how to remain connected. So I'm finding it more and more important to figure out ways to have different water cooler conversations with folks remotely that I would tend to have in the office or within an office space environment. So remaining connected and figuring out ways that we're connecting with colleagues, but also connecting with peers is extremely important. Jeff alluded to a few things. You know, we definitely live in an era where there is a lot of data and there's a lot of information that's at our disposal. So what I've found at Microsoft is in order for us to make quick decisions, I'm always making certain that one, my team, so a lot of the information that I have is not just for Zolna, but just making certain that my team understands the economic indicators. So, you know, as we look at the business or as we look at the transformation or as we look at success, what are the economic indicators that kind of help us quickly make a decision on how to gauge what the data is telling us, but then making certain that we're building collaborative spaces where we can kind of go deep and talk through it really, really fast. As I think about remaining successful, but also remaining connected, some of the skill sets that I've found extremely valuable to me are more so soft skills, right? So it's the ability to quickly relate to your peers and relate to people. It's also the ability to quickly build trust in an online and virtual environment, because I can't touch you and I can't sit across the table from you at a restaurant and break bread, but but in sales and sales strategy, friends buy from friends, right? So how do I quickly build trust with you so that you trust me, even though you're watching me from a computer screen, and we know that we have each other's back and we're supporting each other. And then I'm also finding it just extremely important to just remain curious. And when I say remain curious, it's curious from a personal perspective, but also curious from a business perspective, curious from a personal perspective in that, you know, as part of this whole digital transformation and shift in organizational culture, everyone's been hit differently. So I really spend a lot of time understanding and building my EQ skills with my team and getting to the personal aspects to really understand, you know, what challenges or what obstacles are individuals overcoming to be a part of this meeting, or what challenges or obstacles are they facing this day or this week. And then I'm also spending time with my customers doing the same thing, understanding not just the vulnerabilities that they're facing on a personal perspective, but also understanding the vulnerabilities that their companies and their organizations may be facing, so that we can provide and propose the proper solutions and such.
That is fantastic. There is so much opportunity here. There's a couple of ways you can look at it. You can either be have a lot of angst about this change, or you can embrace it, right? And I think the embracing of it brings tremendous opportunity for growth for each of us as individuals, as well as for our businesses. Jerome, why does digital transformation matter, and how can a professional play a role in digital transformation?
I think digital transformation is the key to helping organizations keep up with their competitors, to gain competitive advantage. When you talk about the business piece of it, how this is the way to actually figure out if a company is going to be successful in the future, not necessarily now, but in the future, because that change is going to help them be that disruptor. in the future. And being that disruptor in an industry is what's going to set them apart from their competitors. But unless there is that change that is happening, and you're right, you are embracing that change and being a part of that change, then you really limit yourself in terms of your career growth and in terms of where you are going to be in the organization in the future. Humans naturally tend to resist the change of things that are uncomfortable, and digital transformation has to be uncomfortable. It is the only way to look at how you actually make the necessary changes you need to make in an organization, because it does impact all of those areas that I talked about: the people, the technology, the processes, the business processes, and in some cases, the business products that are being produced. So those things are evolving and evolving over time. And I think being a part of that, embracing that change, embracing and even looking for that change will help individuals position themselves to be in position to take advantage of those opportunities when they come.
Absolutely. They say growth happens outside of your comfort zone, right?
Yeah, and you know, I would add, like, I love that growth happens outside of your comfort zone. There's this guy who's been popping up more and more, Dr. Michael Gervais. So I recently just moved back to Atlanta. Prior to living in Atlanta, I lived in Seattle for 6 years. And Dr. Michael Gervais is actually the coach. So he's the psychology coach for the Seattle Seahawks. So long story short, I met with him a lot. And when I would meet with him, he would always say, you know, as creatives, every day we should do something that scares us. And I kind of feel like we live in an era where whether you want it or not, it might scare you. But embracing embracing the change, not from a fear perspective, but embracing it from an innovative and embracing it from a, what can I do to support it, encourage it, or accelerate it, I kind of think is also this era that we're in.
Yeah. And the other important piece, and Jeff touched on this a minute ago, that, you know, change will start happening from a leadership perspective. The leaders will see we've got to make these changes from a digital perspective or innovation perspective, whatever that change is. They'll start that process. If you are a quick follower and an embracer of that change, you will be seen as a person that should be part of helping to make those changes happen. If you are one of the reluctant ones and resist, you will be put in that other bucket. And that's not the bucket anyone wants to be in. You definitely want to be in the bucket of, I'm embracing this, I want to be part of it. And, you know, it may scare me, it may disrupt my current role, but all those things are good things.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let me, just wanted to remind the audience, if you have any questions for our panelists, please feel free to add them into the chat or ask your questions live. We're happy to take them. You know, I have a question that came in with respect to well-being. You know, this transformation has brought on a lot of change, as we've all been talking about. We're connected to Zoom for many hours of the day in meetings. Information is coming in all the time, and you have to stay abreast of it. What are some of the strategies that each of you use to support your well-being during this time of such tremendous change? Any advice for our audience?
You know, one thing I would say is you have to find the thing that allows you to decouple from the work environment and allows you to be who you are when you're not at work, right? You know, for me, one of the things that I do regularly, it's a small thing, but is that, you know, at a certain time of the day, I will just walk away from my home office because we're not in the office anymore. I'm at my home office, and that's a challenge in and of itself, right? How you decouple when you're only a few feet away from where you work every day. You know, I walk away. I pull out a vinyl album the old-fashioned black
Oh,
vinyl
Jeff.
album,
I love it.
and I put that on. And I, over this past pandemic, my vinyl collection has grown quite a bit. There's a big resurgence in vinyl. And the reason why I do that, not just any kind of music, but I make sure to get vinyl, is that in that moment, in that time when I am listening to an album on vinyl, I know only have about 25 minutes before I have to get up and flip that thing over and get to the other side. And what that means for me is that I stay engaged with that music for that 25 minutes. And when that time comes, I have to re-engage with the music, flip it over, hear the other side. But it decouples me from the environment. I have streaming music. I can listen to streaming music all day long. But when it's streaming, I don't engage in the same way. So I have to find a way to decouple myself from that work environment, just even if it's only for an hour, just to make sure that I'm keeping the psychological distance that's necessary in order to preserve my own sense of who I am. Who I am is not the person who's on Zoom for 10 or 12 hours a day. That's not who I am. That's what I do, but it's not who I am. And so understanding and reconnecting to the things that you are beyond work and making sure that they're intentional in that re-engagement to that which you are outside of work, I think is vitally important. Otherwise, particularly in these environments where we're working remotely, we're working from home, it's possible to work 24 hours a day and nobody might stop you from doing it. You have to find ways to preserve your sense of who you are and what you are, even though we're still in a pandemic.
Great advice. Zelna?
I love the direction of the conversation, and I echo Jeff's sentiment. I'm in the same boat, right? So I have all sorts of phrases all over my house, and one of my phrases is "Do you're happy." So I'm very big on figuring out what do I need to do once a day, once a week, once a month, once a semester, once a year to keep me happy. Before COVID, I traveled a lot, right? So I just have one last continent to hit before I hit all seven, or hit six of seven because I'm not doing Antarctica. So I'm waiting on borders to open so that I can freely travel. But what my partner and I have been doing is he and I literally will explore a city or a new area every 3 weeks or so. We'll just get on the road and go. So this weekend, for example, we leave in the morning, we're going to Chattanooga, and we literally just go there with no agenda and we explore and just try to figure it out. I've also found that my Peloton community keeps me happy. So kind of going on Peloton is fun and engaging. And then just trying to figure out ways outside of that. So I love the water. So boating is always a great activity. And I still go back and forth visiting my family in Florida. So I also find that whenever I can disconnect and get home, that gives me a way to disconnect as well. But what I've learned in this era of just figuring out my well-being is figuring out ways that I can do my happy. But I've also found that it's just important that I also disconnect from work. So I still take vacation. So I'm on vacation right now. So I've been on vacation for 3 weeks. And I take time to focus on things that are most important to me outside of my career. And I take time to figure out what are things that I need to focus on the second half of the year that are important. So I say, you know, like from a mental perspective, like even though if we are not taking trips or not going on vacation, I still think it's important to find that time to disconnect, and that time to kind of just think about the future and what I do want. So I make time to prioritize those efforts as well.
I love it. I love it. I hearing, be intentional about your well-being from Zelda, loud and clear. I love it. Jerome, what about you?
Yeah, I am loving the pandemic moment right now because, like Zelma, I spend every other week on a plane, and I've done 6 of the 7. I'm with you. I'm not doing the 7th, so I'm going to leave that one alone. But I've done 6 of the 7 many times, And so being at home is a relief. Now, you do have to be careful when you're sitting at home and you're on Zoom calls 12 hours a day, back to back. And Jeff, people will let you if you allow them. So I agree with you. This notion of having someone planning your work-life balance or looking out for your well-being does not happen. You do have to be intentional, Zelma. You have to do that for yourself. And you have to manage and figure out what is your work-life balance. I have mine, and there are certain rules that I have within my work-life balance that I'm just not going to compromise with. I'm going to take a 30-minute break every day, and I don't have a Peloton, but I'm going to go down and hit the dumbbells and stuff, and maybe walk around the block, and then come back. But I'm going to do that 30 minutes a day if it's not raining. So there are certain things you just need to plan on doing. There are things I'm going to do on the weekend with my grandson. We're going to hang out and we're going to have a good time. And, then he's going to go back home to his parents, but it's great. So those are the things that I'm going to do to preserve my work-life balance and make sure that my well-being is in check. And I think everyone has to take that control of your own work-life balance, your own wellness, because no one is planning that for you.
Absolutely. And, Jerome well said, and one of the keys about the well-being is that if you don't prioritize it, right, you're not going to be performing at your best, right? So it is important to prioritize your well-being. And sometimes that gets lost in the busyness of our days, but being intentional about it is the key. I see we've got a couple of questions that have come in. So let me ask the panel and feel free to respond, any of you. So the question on what is the difference between digital transformation and business transformation? How are they different and how are they the same?
And that's a great question, because I think, because even when we kicked off, I think it's important to kind of align on the definition, because there's so much transformation that's occurring. So there's business and digital, and it's so easy to kind of lump them into one. But when I think of digital transformation, I think of what's happening from a digital perspective. So as we look at technology and how the pace of technology continues to accelerate, how is technology disrupting, or how is technology advancing a business model? And then I view business transformation from the perspective of what is that organization or what is that business's function or role, and based on their role or function, how does that business continue to transform or continue to innovate for the next era? I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I would agree with that to some degree. I think there is, for me, I look at business or digital transformation as a much broader bucket, and business transformation, it's more specific to the transformation of that business. Is the business doing something different? Let's take for example, when Apple took the music industry towards iTunes, or Uber reinvented the taxi business. That is a business transformation that I would see, but digital transformation supports that. Digital transformation supports business transformation, cultural transformation, the four pillars I talked about before, the domain transformation, even workflow processes within a business. The digital transformation can help enable all of those.
Agreed.
So it is a much broader bucket that enables business transformation, in my view.
Yeah, and
So-
one point I would make is, like I said, I work a lot with the public sector. I spend a lot of time in public sector. And from a public sector perspective, those two definitions have really come together. And one of the reasons why is because the business model of a city or a county or a state hasn't really changed in the past 100 years, and more than 100 years. And there's cities over 200 years old in the United States. And so the types of disruption that happen in that government context are different. than the types of disruption that happen in a business context, because more often than not, they're not existential in their nature. Nobody's really worried about New York City not being there next year, right? Or even 10 years from now, or 25 years from now. But every company that we work for could potentially not be here in 25 years. And so, that notion of existential threat is different in a government context than it is in a private sector context. So the threat or the opportunities presented by digital transformation about really changing how government works really start to become almost synonymous with business transformation in that context.
Very good responses. Actually, there's a question that has come in related to the public sector. So we have Donna, who works in the federal government space, and where competitors, they don't often think of competitors like those in the private sector. And her question is, what are some of the tips that you can share for helping to make the change in the government space, where oftentimes it takes years to complete these IT projects?
Well, I think one of the things that we've seen in the government context over the past few years is really the change in work processes that have been enabled by digital technologies. And so changes like the use of agile development instead of waterfall, changes like continuous deployment instead of big bang, cloud infrastructure versus hard on-premise infrastructure. All of those things lend themselves to a pace of change in government that could not be sustained under the previous models. And so when I'm working with government customers, at the federal or even state levels, the thing that we hear most often is, wow, I didn't know it was even possible for us to change at this pace because of the constraints that we've had in our environment. And so once people understand that these constraints that they have are largely now resident in their own history, in their own mind, versus being something that's being constrained by the physical or circumstantial constraints of the environment that they're in, it tends to lend itself to a little bit more rapidity, a little bit more quickness to action. Nobody's ever going to say that a state or federal government can be swift in the sense that 100-person company can be. It's just not going to be. But I think even in the past year, as we've seen pandemic responses, we've seen things happen in government in the matter of weeks or months that would have usually taken months to years to get done. And that's been enabled by this layer of digital capability that exists that they can tap into, that they didn't either understand or didn't have access to before. And I think that changes the mindset. It changes the ability to be able to adapt to the new situation. And so, but first, it's really all about changing the mindset. If you're not convinced that it can happen, that it can actually make it, that it can exist, it won't. Think about, somebody who ran the first 4-minute mile, right? Nobody ever did it. But once it was done, within the next year, there are a number of people who just ran the 4-minute mile. Human physiology didn't change. Human psychology didn't change. But breaking through the barrier allowed people to imagine a different future as realistic that they could before. And I think that's one of the things that I see in working with government customers is getting them to understand which are the real barriers, which are the ones that you make up and keep for yourself.
Absolutely. I also believe that, what we're seeing right now in terms of the activity around cyber threats and ransomware, and that has driven some urgent responses from our government. And I think that we'll continue to see that sort of response, going forward. So you said as the, the needs and the environment change,
Yeah.
change is necessary, the transformation.
And you called out exactly one of the exceptions to the existential threat notion that I had. Cybersecurity is an existential threat for both government and for the private sector. So that's a great call.
Absolutely. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all so much. This has been a wonderful conversation. And I hope that, our audience here has gotten some insights out of it. I am going to turn it over to Gina to close us out.
Thanks, Noreen, and thank you for moderating this panel. Thank you to all of our panelists, Jeff, Jerome, Zalna. We just appreciate being able to have the opportunity to hear from you, to be able to talk about this very relevant topic. Personally, some of my key takeaways were being able to have that growth mindset and inspiring a growth mindset all around you, and just imagining a different future. So thank you once again for all that you did in the way of your contributions, time, and investment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you.